So I mentioned that for a while my grandpa wasn't talking to me because we got in an argument over, he was saying how if you're in the flow, you're not attached to your parents and stuff. And I felt like he was trying to keep my parents from me. I don't think he believed the Quadrant model. He told me he thought the Quadrant model was bullshit. I felt like he didn't have respect for me, and he had more respect for my mom and dad, and he wanted, or especially my dad, and he wanted to keep me away from them. And I felt like his spirituality was just a right-wing way to just like blame the victim and keep the victim down. And I saw myself as a victim. And, I felt like he wasn't helping me. I felt like I wanted to talk to my mom and dad. I had a hurt leg. I wanted to see my dad. But my grandpa was like, well, if you're in the flow, you're not attached. And he didn't seem to be wanting to help me very much. And so we got in an argument about that. And then he said, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I'm not going to talk to you anymore. I'm not going to teach you anymore. So then I wrote this was at the time when I was a leftist. I wrote but then I started because then he was, as I described, he started making me more into a right winger. So when I wrote my Based on True Story book, I wrote it more in a right wing sense. So I was trying to make myself into the bad guy and blame myself. And so my grandpa would teach me about how you have to take responsibility for your software and superior, inferior software and insider, outsider software. It's all self-confirmatory. So I'm trying to write a Based on True Story book to get my grandpa to teach me again, because he wouldn't teach me anymore. And in this Based on True Story book, I made myself into the bad guy, and I'm trying to take responsibility for my software. So I'm like, yes, I must have had superior, inferior software because, well, for my whole life I believed in Darwinism, and I was a communist, and I hated religion. But I was like, well, it must have been because I had superior, inferior software. And I didn't at the time really recognize it was because, big bass aspect of it was I saw myself as Jewish and I wanted to destroy the white people, but I didn't want to admit that in the book. But I took responsibility for my software. And I was like, well, I had superior, inferior. I was expressing superior, inferior software. And, but at the time I didn't know that it was important for me to distinguish between expressing software and having software. So I would write have probably, because later my grandpa would teach me, well, you don't have it because that would be personal. But, you were only expressing it because you could always upgrade your software. So I'm like, yes, I expressed dualistic software when I believed in Darwinism, and then I became a right-winger. But I've tried to make myself into such a bad guy in the book. So, like, I even made up stuff like that I was always a right-winger my whole life, but which wasn't true. I was always a left-winger communist. But I was like, yes, and I tried to make myself into a really bad guy, like, oh yeah, I was racist, and I was expressing dualistic software, but my grandpa would teach me that there is no such thing as racism, and there's only just different expressions of software, but I'll get to that more later. But, I was just trying to take responsibility for my software, and so, because that was what my grandpa was like, he said, the only thing you could do, you can't change other people, you can only take responsibility for your software. But I always felt like that was a right-winger thing to do, because it's like, yes, you can change other people, you can influence other people, and I felt like my grandpa's influence was very negative toward me, and it encouraged it didn't help my parents, and it didn't help me, it made my parents, it influenced them more to be more withdrawn from me and to be more neglectful and to be more hurtful and everything. And I always saw it as more right-wing, kind of like stupid. But anyways, I tried to take responsibility for my software, and I made myself into a huge bad guy saying like, basically, but at the time I had become a right-winger again. So I was like, I really was trying to take responsibility, because as a right-winger, I blamed the victim. I was a victim blamer, and I was the victim. So I was trying to make myself the bad guy, and all the bad stuff that happened to me must have been because of, because I was the bad guy, and I was a victim blamer. I became a right-winger victim blamer, right? And I always felt that that's what my grandpa was, but I'll get more to that later. But so my grandpa was, but then after I wrote this book, then my grandpa started teaching me again. And then I'll describe more about how my grandpa kept on influencing more and more. So I don't remember exactly what the fight was at that point, but we got another fight about, my mom and dad situation. I wanted to talk to my mom and dad. He stopped teaching me, but he had already started making me more into a right-winger. So then I wrote that book to try to make him teach me again, to show him that I've been taking responsibility for my software, Grandpa. And then he started teaching me again. But I'll kind of describe some of the stuff that I talked about with my grandpa. But I'll get more into this later. But I remember even when I was a communist and I wrote my Based on True Story book as a communist, like I was talking about how my grandpa tried to make me independent. He was trying to force me to be independent and try to make me take responsibility and make me independent. And because then you're more in the flow when you're independent, because you're not with ally enemy software, because you're not depending on people. When you depend on people, you have ally enemy software, because if they do what you want, then they're your ally. If they don't, then they're your enemy. And that's self-confirmatory, and then you fight them. But if you're independent, then you're more in the flow. You're more susceptible to the flow. So you want to be independent. And I described how his that ended up getting me in the psych ward, and that ended up, my parents misinterpreted it. It's not, don't talk to him, and it just screwed things up so bad. And I remember my uncle was calling my grandpa El Rojo Diablo, and my uncle was really mad at my grandpa. My uncle told me, he was like, dude, you could have played professional basketball. You could have done big stuff with basketball and stuff, but your grandpa ended up having you injured, and your grandpa, his whole making you independent stuff, he screwed things up. And my uncle's like, dude, grandpa's an idiot, But this is now, that was in 2014 when that happened. Then in 2016, like I said, my grandpa stopped teaching me again because we got in an argument over my mom and dad. I wanted to talk to them, and I felt like he wasn't helping me, and I felt like he was the one who made things screwed up. And then he stopped teaching me, but then I tried to take responsibility for my software. And one of the things I had to take responsibility, now I know, he didn't like that I would get angry with him. So I had to take responsibility for my, anger management. I had to take responsibility for my software and not get angry and not try to make things happen and not try to use my ego, right? So, but then he started teaching me again. But I one of the things that he told me at this time was, he was like, I wanted to talk to my mom and dad, and my grandpa was like, your software is not at a level to talk to your dad. Your software is not high enough to talk to your dad. It wouldn't work. It wouldn't. So it's like, dude, I should talk to my dad. It shouldn't matter what my software is, even if let's pretend that software is a very important, crucial thing. It shouldn't matter. My dad should still talk to me. But he was like, no, your software is not at a high enough level to talk to your dad. He's like, your dad's not either. Your dad's software isn't either. But in my mind, I'm like, dude, stop with this whole stupid software stuff. I just want to talk to my dad. And I do want to explain to him about the shoot away machine and stuff. And it would, if we could just be mature, just normal people and not freaking weirdos about software, I could talk to my dad. But my grandpa's like, well, your software's not high enough. You still and then he tried to explain to me. This was the time when he explained to me about the Ally Enemy software. He's like, well, because you don't have a job, Ryan, and this was 2016. He's like, because you don't have a job, you're stuck in Ally Enemy software because you're still dependent on your mom and dad. Only once you're not dependent on your mom and dad will you have high enough software. Because then if they don't do what you want them to do, then, if they do what you want them to do, then you're going to have ally software and you're going to be happy with them. But if they don't, then you're going to have enemy software and then you're going to fight them. And that's dualistic and that's self-confirmatory. And the thing was, I was like, but that was pissing me off so much, because it's like, dude, regardless, even if I had a job, still my dad wouldn't talk to me. And I proved that later. And regardless, it's like, my dad should be talking to me regardless. It would help me if my dad could talk to me, and if I could see my mom. My mom would talk to me on the phone a little bit, but she would barely, like I told you, like I said, she said that she talked to NAMI people. She talked to her psychiatrist, and her psychiatrist recommended that she don't talk to me because, so she stopped talking to me, and she would block me on the phone, and I could only talk to her every once in a while if it was something crucial. But I was like, dude, enough with this stupid software stuff. I want to talk to my dad. And my dad, he knew how good I was at basketball. And if I could just show him about the shoot away machine, that they think it was a character flaw with me. My mom and dad and my grandpa, they think that, it must have been, you must not be able to take no for an answer. You must have a character flaw, obsessive compulsive. No, if it wasn't for the shoot away machine, none of this stuff would have happened. None of this stuff would have happened. I would have been good with my dad. Everything would have been great. I would have been a huge basketball player. Everything would have been fine. But the problem was about the shoot away machine, and it wasn't a character flaw of me, but that's what they wanted to believe. And I want to show them about the shoot away machine. I can really show them so specifically how it messed it up, what, all that type of stuff. But now, at that time, I couldn't as well as I can even now. At that time, I could, because I could show him how the shoot away messed up my shot, but I still hadn't fixed my shot at that time. Only when I played at Compton College in 2020 or 2019 did I start fixing my shot, because I started studying the videos exactly, because I didn't even know I could fix my shot at that time. But then I started doing exactly what I saw in the videos, how I moved into it. And now I can really explain to my dad about the shoot away machine, what it did and everything. But I'm not going to get into details about that because I don't want to make good shooters think. But back to the story. So my grandpa's teaching me about the Ally Enemy software. And then my grandpa, again, my point is, he's making me more right wing. So another thing that he started teaching me was, he was teaching me about synergy. And I'm going to get more into how he's making me more religious and right wing, but he started teaching me about he taught me this before, but he started really emphasizing this. His theory was, and again, he said that the quadrant model was bullshit. He didn't believe it. He thought it was magical thinking. He thought it was magical thinking that the cross had power, or that the quadrant had power, and that there was some sort of supernatural pattern. He was like, that's bullshit. Because my grandpa didn't believe that stuff. He didn't believe in supernatural. He was very naturalistic, new age, but also very naturalistic. So everything is energy. And yes, Jesus could manipulate the energy, but he tried to make it very rationalistic. But it wasn't supernatural. It wasn't like magical. He just since everything's energy, you can manipulate energy, so you can move mountains. And so he's very naturalistic, right? So, but my grandpa was trying to teach me his theory that he got from Buckminster Fuller, that he was like, life is an anti-entropic reordering function. So now he's teaching me this. So this is like 2016, 2017, 2018. He's teaching me all this stuff. In 2019, he's like, life is and he taught me this before, but now he starts really emphasizing it because he's trying to make me independent. He's like, life is an anti-entropic reordering function. And anti-entropy means going against disorder. So that's why you have to work. So as he's saying this, I'm thinking to myself again, like, oh, yep, he's a white supremacist right winger. But again, he was moving me more toward that, and I became that. So I was like, yeah, all very into working hard and synergy and maintaining the order and So and remember when I was a Marxist communist, I was like, no. My grandpa talked about work in progress and how life is evolving toward what comes after life, which is a kingdom of heaven. From cells to from quarks to molecules to cells to life to what comes after life, and I was always like, that's the white supremacist right winger progress type of stuff, and I was against the idea of progress. I liked the idea that things were actually going worse and that the white people were screwing things up, and progress was not true. And just let's relax. I was kind of a hippie communist, anti-white, right? Like Avatar. Like I like the movie. I would like the movie Avatar more, right? Like let's just be Let's just be hippies. Let's be communists. That would be better. But my grandpa would later teach me like that's not the flow, because then you're trying not to try, and that's still trying, and it's still self-confirmatory. It's still lazy. So that's what my grandpa's teaching me about the anti-entropic reordering function. He's like, life is an anti-entropic reordering function. There's all of the entropy in the universe, and life is in counterbalance to the entropy of the universe. And that was Buckminster Fuller's idea, apparently. And apparently other people have had that idea, that the purpose of life is to work in counterbalance to the entropy of the universe, and it maintains the universe. So my grandpa's like, so if you're not in alignment with the order, there's consequences, negative consequences. One's like, ending up in psych wards. Because my grandpa didn't believe the quadrilateral. He thought that I had an unstable ego. He didn't know that I actually discovered the theory of everything. So he thought that this is, just imagine the amount of mental anguish that I'm going through at this time. Like, he doesn't believe me about the quadrant model still. He's looking down upon me. And then that's a part of the reason why I think that he's not helping me talk to my mom and dad, because he doesn't believe the quadrant model. He thinks that I'm a fucking freak. And I know that. That's what he thinks of me. So I'm like, dude, this sucks, And he's like, yes, life is an anti-entropic reordering function, and therefore, Ryan, you have to work, because if you're in the synergy, and he doesn't know that I'm working my ass off with in creativity, and working with the quadrant model and stuff. But he doesn't know that. He thinks I'm wasting my time, and he doesn't believe the quadrant model. He thinks it's bullshit. He told me. So he's like, so once you start working, now you're in counterbalance to the entropy of the universe, and you're in synergy, and positive things happen. Because you're in alignment with the nature of life and of the universe. But if you're not, then negative things happen, So he's trying to explain this to me about the nature of, and he kind of starts teaching me like about, like I was always against the idea of reincarnation. I thought it was stupid. It was just a religious concept that, again, was right wing, that makes people, think that justify the status quo. Oh, the reason why I'm rich is because of my past life, and oh, the reason you're poor is because of your past life. And I always thought it blames the victim and it extols the victor, But I remember, like, one time I asked my grandpa, like, what do you think is soulmates? And my grandpa was like, well, maybe it comes from reincarnation. And, my grandpa was into the idea of reincarnation as being a possibility. Like, he's open to that idea. So, again, he's moving me more toward, like, right wing. Like, okay, well, we should work because it's anti-entropic. And he's also moving me toward religious, or right wing religious. And I always hated religion because I thought it was white supremacist. It maintains division and stuff. But now I'm like, moving a little bit more toward it. Like, okay, well, maybe the Hindus are right. Maybe the spiritual, I always hated spirituality because I thought it was right wing, but I'm like, well, maybe my, so he's moving more toward the right wing, more toward the spiritual. And I was always like a communist leftist. I hated religion, hated spirituality. I thought it maintained the status quo. And like I said, I liked bad stuff. And I took that from my grandpa, though. Like, my grandpa's idea that, there is no formula for the flow. Like, you can be bad and they can get you in the flow. Like, you can, be a murderer and still get in the flow, because you can raise your level of liveness. You can still lose yourself, and someone could be very good and be very religious but not get in the flow. So there's no formula for the flow, and that's what Jesus meant by it's only by grace that you can be saved, or that's what Paul meant, right? Like, the self can't save the self. But I like that idea because I was like, okay, well, it's anti-religious and religion is white supremacist, and so But regardless, what I'm getting at though is my grandpa was moving more toward right wing, and I became more right wing again, and I became more of a white supremacist, like pro white, pro religion, right wing. And like, I'll just give another example though. Like, but I knew that my grandpa was wrong though in ways, because I knew that the quadrant model was true, and I knew that he didn't know the nature of reality. So I remember one time I was reading this book from Chabad, like a Zohar book, and in the book it was talking about how if the Jews stopped doing their rituals, then the universe would be destroyed. And then I was like, what do you think about that, Grandpa? My grandpa was like, at first he was like, well, that seems magical thinking. But he was like, well, if it's true that life is an anti-entropic reordering function, well, maybe the rituals are part of the anti-entropic reordering function. So maybe that is true. So very naturalistic way of looking at it. It's like new age, it's like new age, but also very naturalistic. But when I thought of it, I was like, no, if the Jews stopped doing their rituals, the universe would cease to exist, because, there's a supernatural component to it. It's, my grandpa, oh, that's magical thinking. What, are they trying to like please a separate God? Well, there is no separate God. Everything is energy. There is no separate God. And he tried to be very naturalistic, right? But I saw it as like, the universe kind of archetypal, like Jungian, like there's archetypes, and everything has its place within the archetypal system. And yes, if there wasn't the Jews, maybe the universe wouldn't exist, because that's a necessary component within the archetypal dimensions, right? So I can see it that way, but my grandpa's way was too naturalistic to me. It's like, oh, well, because it's maybe working in anti-entropic reordering function, and that makes sense. But he was very into this idea of synergy and anti-entropy, and I did always saw that before as like white supremacists, like always so into working hard and going all out and synergy, and to me that seemed white supremacist. Another thing that always seemed white supremacist to me was my grandpa would be very into like classical music. And like he looked at Mozart very good, and now I understand what he meant. Like when you listen to Mozart, it puts you in a meditative state, which can take you outside of the body. So it's not like rock music or like rap music or other types of music can get you really tied up in your emotions and tied up in the body, which is self-confirmatory, and the self is an illusion. But like Mozart can get you into a meditative state and get you to still your mind so that you can transcend your thoughts and transcend the self, because your thoughts are shaped by your ego, so you can transcend it. But I always thought it was like white supremacist. Like I was like, you like Mozart because he's white, and and when I was a communist, like I liked the disorder and the decay, and I thought that there was white supremacists to just be like, oh, Mozart's good, but the other guys are all, I don't really like the other guys. So, but now I have I kind of have a deeper understanding of what he's getting at now, but I didn't have it then. But at this time, my grandpa, again, like I didn't really quite understand what he meant by the flow. He didn't teach me well. Now I understand what he means by flow, pure awareness, which is truth, like awareness is not contaminated. I didn't understand that though before. He didn't teach me well. So I was just confused, but he was moving me more toward right wing. And another thing, like I said, I was always anti-religious, and I always thought that he was kind of anti-religious. But then another thing that happened was like I took him to a different temple. And in the temple, like I started reading to him this thing about the sacrifices in the temple. And it was talking about how when the Jews would sacrifice the cows, the cows would burn, and it gave them like an awareness of oneness. And my grandpa was reading that, and he was like, yeah, it gave them oneness, because when they burn, you just see the energy, and you don't see the physical, but you're just seeing the ethereal, the energy, and that can give you an awareness of oneness. And my grandpa was like, well, then that's a good ritual. So I was like, well, what do you think though, Grandpa? Should Jews reestablish a temple and reinstate temple sacrifices? Now, before, my grandpa would probably be was like, I asked him that before, and he was like, no, that could be like based off dualistic software and stuff. But then this time, my grandpa was like, so that was when I was anti-religion and I was a communist. But this time, my grandpa was like, well, it could be a good ritual discipline, because if it really, it really can create that, help to facilitate that awareness of oneness. And my grandpa would be like, any ritual is beneficial because it takes you out of your habits and your circumstances, your whims, and your ties to relationships. And by performing any ritual, it's taking you out of that. And it's, you lose yourself in the ritual, which is closer to the flow, right? So he's like, well, it could be actually beneficial to reinstate the temple. So now I'm moving. My whole life I was like communist and anti-white, and I thought that was best for the Jews. So, but now I'm starting to think at this time, like 2016, 2017, 2018, I'm starting to become religious. I'm thinking like, well, maybe we should rebuild the temple. And I'm like, well, maybe, and maybe religion is good. Because I was always anti-religion, because I thought it was I thought religion was pro-white, white supremacist, and I was always anti-white. So So my grandpa my grandpa was giving me these ideas like, well, maybe religion would be the best. And I started thinking, well, maybe I should try to rebuild the temple. And then maybe, and the big thing was like, I wanted to get my basketball videos when I was younger. And I thought maybe if I can rebuild the temple and get power, I can get my basketball videos and I can study the flow and I could do all that. Now, when I wrote those books, like the based on true story books, when I was trying to make myself the bad guy, I was like, yeah, I wanted the power so that I could, because I was trying to make myself the bad guy because that made my grandpa teach me again, because my grandpa liked when I blamed myself. But my grandpa said, no, I didn't like when you blame yourself. I just like when you take responsibility for your software. So I tried to take responsibility for my software and make myself the bad guy. And I'm like, yeah, I must have had superior, inferior software. And that's why I wanted my basketball videos. And there could be a component of that, but really I do think that the most basic thing is I wanted to study the flow, and I was really considered the best shooter in the country. Like, and he didn't believe that at the time, and I'll get to that more later about how why he didn't believe that. I'll talk about how I showed him videos, and he was surprised that I even started as a freshman on varsity. He was like, "What, you started?" But he didn't know anything, and a lot of people probably don't really believe me about that, but it's true. But I want to study the flow. I want to study what I did, and I did things that nobody does. It's crazy. So regardless, he was moving me more from left-wing, communist, anti-religious, and I was moving more again toward right-wing, nationalist, pro-religious. But I was still confused. I didn't understand the flow. He was still confusing me. I was confused at this point, but I was trying to understand more. So, there was a really real impetus for me to try to learn more from my grandpa, and that's why it hurt so bad when he would stop teaching me, because he would leave me in the dust without me really understanding the stuff, because he didn't teach me well. And he didn't have insight into, my anti-whiteness and stuff like that, which I think would have been important for him to discern, but he never discerned that. So, but I'll get more into this story later.